Welcome to my channel, a place where every mystery hides a story, and every story hides a truth. In the midst of forgotten streets, footsteps echo through the silence, and the faint glow of a lamp guards secrets that refuse to die. Every clue matters. A torn letter, a fading footprint, even the sound of a clock ticking in the dark. Here, doubt becomes a puzzle, and puzzles lead us to the heart of the unknown. So prepare your mind, watch closely, and listen carefully, because the shadows are speaking, and the truth is waiting to be found. This is where every case begins. Welcome to my channel. Asterisk.
Chapter 1. The Teabag That Shouldn't Existed was a cold March morning, and the soot-stained fog of London hung low across Baker Street, lending the city its peculiar hush, half still, half smothered, like a patient under chloroform. I had just returned from my morning constitutional and was removing my gloves when I found Holmes seated, as ever, in his armchair, pipe in hand, legs crossed, and a sharp glint in his eye that told me some new intrigue had already set its hooks in him. On the table before him lay a crumpled envelope, a porcelain saucer bearing a spent tea bag, and a letter opener that had seen more action as an evidence probe than for its intended postal use. "You're late, Watson," Holmes said without looking up. "I took the liberty of examining the contents of your breakfast hamper." "My hamper?" I echoed. "That was meant for Mrs. Hudson's cousin in Surrey." Holmes lifted a single finger, stopping me as neatly as a butler halting a carriage. "Indeed, but the parcel was mislabeled. I intercepted it before Mrs. Hudson could correct the mistake. It contained a most intriguing item, this ordinary-looking tea bag." He held it up delicately between thumb and forefinger. "And yet, Watson, it is no ordinary tea bag. It contains a note." I blinked. "A note inside the tea." Holmes gave a curt nod, and with the flat of the letter opener, he parted the paper casing delicately. Out slid a scrap of vellum no larger than a postage stamp, faintly stained with Darjeeling and bearing tiny, meticulous handwriting. "What does it say?" I asked, leaning forward. He passed it to me. "Tell Lady R he knows. Meet at the old quarters. Destroy this." Holmes watched my face as I read. The ink, I should add, is a rare hybrid chemical compound used by the Royal Naval Intelligence between 1889 and 1894. I've only seen it twice before. The handwriting matches none from our previous cases, but the angle of slant and peculiar emphasis on the M- suggests a female hand, possibly trained in clerical shorthand. "A spy's note," I ventured. Holmes shrugged. "Perhaps. Or a smuggler's warning. Or a blackmailer's signal." The tea brand is a little-known Ceylonese blend Cavendish estate, distributed exclusively to a handful of Mayfair parlors, and Lady R. He rose and crossed to the mantel, where the fire hissed low in the grate. "There are precisely 3 titled women in London known by the abbreviation Lady or a Lady Ravensbrooke, Lady Rothermere, and Lady Rayburn. Of the 3, only one is recently returned from overseas, and only one is rumored to have had ties to naval intelligence during the Sudan campaign." I felt a sudden jolt of excitement. "Lady Ravensbrooke." Holmes smiled thinly. "Precisely. Her husband died under ambiguous circumstances near Alexandria. She vanished from the social register for nearly a decade, only to resurface last month at a gala for wounded servicemen. Curiously, she has refused all interviews, declined all invitations, and maintains an armed footman at her door. But what connection does she have to this tea bag? That, my dear Watson, is precisely the question. Someone sent this note, expecting it to arrive discreetly, perhaps even fatally unnoticed. Yet it reached us instead." I felt a twinge of unease. "Holmes, if the note was meant to be destroyed, then it might already be too late. Someone may know it's missing." "Undoubtedly," Holmes said coolly. "Which is why I intend to call upon Lady Ravensbrooke within the hour." A knock came at the door, then urgent, rapid, and uneven. Before Mrs. Hudson could reach it, Holmes was already moving. He flung it open, revealing a trembling man in a heavy wool coat, his face ashen and damp with sweat. A tweed flat cap was crumpled in his gloved hands. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped. It's Lady Ravensbrooke. She's vanished. Vanished from her carriage mid-route. And God help us, there's blood on the velvet seat." Holmes stepped aside swiftly. "Come in, Inspector." "You're just in time for tea." The man entered, and it was then I recognized him, Inspector Gregory, his collar unbuttoned and his composure worn thin. He handed Holmes a folded telegram with the crisp efficiency of a man used to dealing with tragedy. Holmes opened it. His brow furrowed. "What does it say?" I asked. He read aloud. "Lady Ravensbrook missing. Carriage found unhitched outside Gower Street. Footman unresponsive. Driver vanished. Door ajar. Blood inside. No sign of struggle outside. Note fragment under seat. Q20 for no witness. Midnight." Holmes turned the telegram over, then slowly back again. "A code, Watson. Or a schedule. Perhaps both. And Q to 4 a curious. That is the designation of a decommissioned safehouse in Soho. Naval, supposedly disused since '92. I tried to speak, but found I had no words. Holmes was already retrieving his coat. "Watson, we are no longer observers of a curiosity, we are actors in a play already begun. And we are behind the curtain." As I snatched up my revolver and followed them down the steps of 221B, I could not help but feel that this was no ordinary crime. It reeked not only of secrecy, but of something more ancient ritualistic, even like an echo from war-shadowed corridors, where tea was once poured with trembling hands, and truth was hidden in the steam. Chapter 2. The Carriage and the Codebe. The time we reached Gower Street, the spring fog had thickened to a dull gray wall, muffling the rattle of hansoms and making the gas lamps appear as hovering orbs, specters of their usual selves. Holmes was in a peculiar state. His long frame leaned forward in our cab, as though his mind were already inside the crime scene, fingers twitching in restless anticipation, lips tight with suppressed observation. Inspector Gregory sat opposite, a man clearly torn between protocol and dread. "It was discovered not an hour ago," Gregory explained. "An anonymous tip sent to the yard. The address was precise. And the condition of the carriage." He trailed off. Holmes said nothing. He merely nodded once. When we arrived, the sight was both alarming and surreal. The Ravensbrook family carriage, an ornate black barouche, finely upholstered and bearing the family crest, stood idle at the curb. No horses were attached to it. One wheel was skewed as if struck by sudden force. The carriage lanterns were still lit, flickering dimly in the mist like the eyes of a confused animal. "Driver?" Holmes asked quietly. "Gone," Gregory replied. "Footman was found in the alley nearby, conscious now, but disoriented and raving. Some kind of drug, the physician suspects." Holmes stepped closer and gestured for me to follow. The rear door of the carriage hung open. Holmes produced a pair of fine tweezers from his coat and gently lifted the blood-stained velvet cushion that had been displaced. The stain was not large, perhaps no larger than a clenched fist, but it was fresh, dark, and absorbed deeply into the fabric. "Too little for a fatal wound," he murmured. "But not accidental." He bent and peered under the bench seat. "There," he said, flicking a finger. Gregory leaned in, eyes narrowed. "You mean that scrap?" A fragment of paper, no larger than a visiting card, lay pressed into the joint between seat and wall. Holmes extracted it delicately. It had been partially torn, but the ink was still legible. Q24, no witness. Midnight. Holmes handed it to me for safekeeping, then turned to the door frame. He examined the hinges, the upholstery, even the latch. Then he crouched beside a scuffed boot mark on the floor of the carriage, distinct in the shallow smear of blood. "Watson, measure the tread, compare it to your own," he instructed. I did so. The boot print was narrower and longer than my own, the heel distinctively sloped. "Not a coachman's," I said. "And certainly not Lady Ravensbrook's." Holmes nodded. "Exactly. A man of agile build, likely under 10 stone. That heel pattern. Military issue, pre-Boer campaign. Naval, perhaps. But altered. See how the rubber's been carved along the arch." He looked up sharply. "This was no random abduction. This was executed with precision." Gregory cleared his throat. "We interviewed the footman briefly. He said he heard a sharp hiss like gas venting, then remembers nothing. A chloroform compound, we assume." Holmes's gaze flicked back toward the alley where the man had been found. "And no witnesses to the disappearance itself?" Gregory shook his head. "Not a one." As though the fog itself swallowed her, Holmes straightened. "Then it wasn't meant to be witnessed." We stood there for a moment, the air thick with questions unasked. Finally, Holmes spoke again. "Have the carriage sent to Scotland Yard. Do not clean it. I want the interior preserved exactly as found." Gregory nodded and turned away to dispatch a constable. Holmes leaned toward me. "The question, Watson, is not merely where Lady Ravensbrook has gone, but why she allowed herself to be taken." Aloud. He gave me a thin smile. "You forget, She was once an intelligence courier. The safest way to vanish is to pretend one has been taken. My mind raced. You believe she staged it? No, but I believe she knew it was coming and permitted it, rather than risk someone else being harmed. We are not dealing with amateurs here. As we stepped back into the cab, Holmes sat silently for a full minute before speaking again. Q24, he muttered. A naval designation. We'll confirm it through Mycroft. We returned to Baker Street at once. Holmes sent a wire through our usual discreet channel encrypted and bearing only 3 words. Q24, Ravensbrook, confirm. It would reach his brother's office within the hour. In the meantime, Holmes sat before the fireplace with the remains of the tea bag once again in his hand. He turned it slowly, his eyes scanning its seams. Look here, Watson, he said suddenly. He held out the interior pouch torn delicately along one seam. It's been opened before. The edge is sealed, but not factory stitched. Someone resealed it with beeswax and rolled parchment. The message was inserted later. A smuggled note. A trigger, rather, Holmes said. A silent alarm. She was warning someone, or calling them to act. A soft rapping came at the door. Mrs. Hudson peeked in. A messenger, Mr. Holmes. No name, just this. She handed over a folded card. Holmes opened it. His brows lifted only slightly. He turned it toward me. A pot of tea at the old quarters, 9 sharp. Come alone. R.R., I said. Ravensbrook. Holmes was already standing. Perhaps. Or perhaps not. But whoever sent it knows the symbol well enough to use it and bold enough to summon me. And the old quarters. I asked. Holmes gave me a long look. A safe house from the Afghan affair. Closed. Forgotten. Until now. The note fluttered into the fire behind him, curling into smoke. And in that moment, I understood this was no simple disappearance. This was the prologue to something deeper. Holmes did not just intend to find Lady Ravensbrook, he intended to uncover what made her vanish. Chapter 3. Tea in the shadows. So-called old quarters lay in the forgotten labyrinths of Clockenwell, where former safe houses of empire had once kept secrets tighter than vaults. Brick-fronted row houses, long since abandoned or let to disreputable lodgers, stood crumbling beneath the weight of London's accumulated grime. It was not a place one stumbled into indeed. Even in Holmes's line of work, few places retained so rich a history of espionage and silence. We arrived precisely 5 minutes before the appointed hour. Holmes wore his simplest attire: gray coat, black gloves, and his collar turned up not to disguise, but to blend. I followed a pace behind, revolver discreetly holstered. Uncertain whether we came as guests or bait. The building at No. 14 Ashbridge Lane looked no different from its neighbor's shuttered windows. A rusted boot scraper and an iron knocker that bore the scar of long disuse. Holmes tapped once, then again 3 quick raps, then 2, a code I did not recognize, but one he evidently remembered. Moments later, the door creaked inward on unlit hinges. A faint draft of camphor and old paper wafted out. We stepped inside. The room was dim, save for a single oil lamp that cast elliptical shadows on faded wallpaper. There was no furniture save for a small round table with 2 chairs. Upon it sat a porcelain teapot, steam still curling from its spout and to matching cups. A third chair stood in the corner, folded and covered in a cloth. No one was present. Holmes said nothing, but examined the table closely. He touched neither the teacups nor the pot, but crouched beside the legs, brushing his fingers along the wood. A woman was here, he said. Moments ago. Wore gloves. Sat in the chair nearest the door, leaning slightly forward. The scent he inhaled, orange blossom and quinine. She carries a scent used in Cairo, an old hospital blend, favored by missionaries. She wanted to speak, but not to be seen. He turned to the mantel, where a faint smudge of soot had been disturbed. She left when she heard us coming. Through the servants' exit in the rear. A prepared retreat. I was about to question further when Holmes suddenly pointed at the teapot's lid. Inside was a thin sheet of rice paper curled like a chrysanthemum petal. He lifted it with tweezers, a single line in faint brown ink. He watches the watchers. Trust no uniform. Holmes exhaled slowly, eyes narrowed. So it's deeper than I feared. Someone within naval intelligence is compromised, or worse, orchestrating this entire affair. Lady Ravensbrook may have staged her disappearance to escape not foreign danger, but domestic betrayal. Do you recognize the handwriting? I asked. He gave a short shake of the head. Too careful, to clean. Not hers, a trained scribe. Likely dictated. Just then, a sound from the stairwell, a creak, brief but unmistakable. Holmes froze. My hand moved instinctively to my revolver. Holmes motioned for silence and stepped lightly toward the corner beside the stair. His form nearly melting into shadow, a figure moved barely visible then turned to run. But Holmes was faster. In 3 steps he seized the coat of the fleeing man and spun him bodily against the wall with a controlled force that betrayed no strain. Light. "Watson," Holmes said. I lit the lamp fully, casting its beam on the intruder. He was no older than 20, sharp-cheeked, his face dirty, with a mess of straw-colored hair and an expression of defiance that cracked as Holmes tightened his grip. "Name," Holmes said. The boy glared. "You're not a copper," Holmes smiled. "Which is precisely why you're still standing." "Now name." "Thorne," he muttered. "Ned Thorne, runner for just for messages, sir, I swear it." Holmes released him slowly. "And what message brought you here?" "I was told to retrieve the cups." "Just the cups. Said there'd be no one here." "I didn't see nothin', sir, I swear on my mum." Holmes studied the boy. "Who told you?" "I dunno the gent's name. Tall, pale. Gave me a coin and said he'd give me 5 more if I brought the cups to a man in Temple Garden." Holmes turned to me. "Do you see, Watson? The tea was not meant for us. It was bait for another, to prove someone had arrived." "Precisely. The boy would have delivered the stained cups. A man in Temple would have checked for traces, perhaps of poison, perhaps of ink, perhaps something else entirely. And when he saw none, he would know he had received the message. And failed to act." Holmes turned back to the boy. "Did the man give you a name?" "No, sir. But he had a pin, a little brass badge, like a fleur-de-lis. Wore it on the inner lapel." Holmes's eyes flashed. "Royal Engineers. Or someone posing as one." He turned to Gregory, who had just entered, summoned by Holmes's earlier note. "Take this boy to Inspector Bradstreet. Keep him safe. Say only that he witnessed a matter of urgent concern and must not speak to anyone but myself or Bradstreet. No one else." Gregory nodded and led the now terrified boy away. As silence returned, Holmes stood still, staring at the now empty chairs. "They are playing a deeper game than even I anticipated," he murmured. "And what now?" I asked. He turned to me, his face grim. "We go to Temple Garden. The man who waits there believes he is safe. Let us see how he reacts when we arrive with empty hands and full knowledge." He reached for his coat and hat. "Time, Watson, is no longer on our side. If Lady Ravensbrooke has made herself a ghost, then somewhere, someone is already preparing a grave." Chapter 4. The Man in Temple Garden. The gardens of Temple, tucked between the courts of law and the slow, winding Thames, had always struck me as oddly monastic. It was a place of murmured confessions and slow footfalls, where barristers and judges wandered amid flower-beds with the same gravity they brought to the bench. Even now, in the dimming light of late afternoon, the gravel paths held an unnatural silence. Holmes and I moved without speaking. The message boy's account had given us a clear direction. The cups of tea, retrieved under the illusion of secrecy, were to be delivered to a man waiting somewhere among these trimmed hedgerows. What he hoped to learn from them, Holmes had speculated a signal, perhaps a confirmation of presence, remained unclear. But one thing was certain, he would not expect Holmes himself to arrive instead. We entered through the side gate and walked slowly toward the northern quadrant, where an iron bench overlooked a weathered sundial. Holmes halted there, scanning the surroundings with a calm precision. "There," he whispered, barely moving his lips, on a bench beneath an ancient yew tree, a man sat alone. He was tall, thin, and plainly dressed in a long gray coat. He held a newspaper in one hand and a paper parcel in the other. His face was half concealed beneath the brim of a bowler hat tilted just slightly too low, as though borrowed from the stage. Holmes gestured subtly, and we circled to approach from behind. As we drew closer, I saw his left hand twitch once, then still. Holmes stepped forward. "Lovely weather for secrets," he said mildly. The man didn't flinch. He lowered his paper without surprise and studied Holmes with eyes that were a shade too pale, glass-like, intelligent, but unnervingly void of emotion. "I don't believe we've met," the man said. "No," Holmes replied. "But you were expecting someone else." The man's lips twitched. "Perhaps, then allow me to disappoint you. The cups will not be arriving." The runner was intercepted. A pause. "You're Mr. Holmes," the man said, voice calm. "I thought your face might appear. The message reached you, then?" "It did," Holmes replied. "And Lady Ravensbrooke?" The man blinked once, vanished. "So they say." Holmes moved slightly closer. "And do you know why?" The man tilted his head. She saw too much. What did she see? The faintest of smiles played across the man's lips. The kind of thing that gets people killed. Holmes narrowed his eyes. You speak with the calm of someone too far from the fire to feel the heat. The man placed his parcel gently on the bench. You've interrupted something delicate. Mr. Holmes, your curiosity may be brilliant. But brilliance burns just as easily as ignorance. I'll take that as a threat. Take it however you like. Holmes leaned forward slightly. Tell me this, what is Q24? For the first time, the man's expression faltered. I thought so, Holmes murmured. You didn't expect us to know that. The man's hand moved toward his coat. I tensed instinctively, but Holmes raised a single finger to halt me. Don't be foolish, he said, eyes locked on the man's. You're watched. The man's hand froze. Holmes gestured over his shoulder, where a figure now stood half-shadowed near the west entrance, a yard constable, stationed there at Holmes's quiet instruction before we'd entered. I suggest you leave, Holmes said quietly. Not because you are frightened, but because you are now irrelevant. Whatever plan you were part of has changed. You've been outmaneuvered. The man looked from Holmes to the constable, then back again. He stood slowly, picked up the parcel, and walked away without another word, melting into the tree-lined exit like a ghost freed from stage direction. We remained a moment longer. Do you know who he was? I asked. I have a suspicion, Holmes said, but I require confirmation. There was no badge, nothing overt, but his left cuff bore 3 pinholes, the spacing of which precisely matches the insignia of the Royal Engineers. Then the boy was right. Yes, and more than that, his shoes were naval make, but of a cut not issued since '89. He's either an ex-operative or posing as one. Either way, he's connected. Holmes turned to me. Let's walk, Watson. There is much to unravel before dusk. We made our way back toward Fleet Street, the Thames mist curling like smoke at the river's edge. Holmes spoke in a low, rapid tone. We now have 3 key elements. First, the intercepted message in the Teabag, warning Lady Ravensbrook and prompting her to disappear. Second, the code fragment referencing Q24, a naval site whose existence is known to very few. And third, this courier in Temple Garden, likely part of a larger operation designed to track responses to the message, which suggests, I said, that Lady Ravensbrook wasn't just fleeing someone. She was signaling others. Holmes nodded. Precisely. But now the game has shifted. Her signal reached the wrong hands or the right ones, depending on who's playing. Either she's being protected by a clandestine ally, or hunted by those she once served. We turned the corner onto Chancery Lane just as the bells of Temple Church began to chime. Holmes stopped. Tomorrow, Watson, we visit Mycroft. It's time we learned exactly what Q24 was, and who might kill to keep it buried. Chapter 5. The red herring at Pall Mall. Following morning dawned with a brittle chill that lingered even as the sun strained to pierce the London haze. The streets bustled with the low thrum of carts, carriages, and footfall, but inside the Diogenes Club, Mycroft Holmes's sanctuary, time slowed to a dignified crawl. Conversation, as always, was a crime against decorum, and only the faint clink of teacups disturbed the rarefied air. We were ushered without delay into Mycroft's private chamber, a curt privilege Holmes invoked only when urgency demanded it. The elder Holmes, larger both in girth and gravitas, looked up from a folded dispatch and peered over his spectacles with the expression of a man mildly irritated by gravity itself. So, Mycroft began, folding the paper with surgical precision. You've stumbled into something unpleasant. Sherlock, again. Holmes gave a half-smile. Q24. I need everything. Mycroft's brow tightened, just slightly. I thought that designation was long buried. Clearly not. Someone resurrected it quite recently. Mycroft motioned to a leather dossier beside his armchair. Then we are both chasing ghosts. Holmes took the file and opened it. I leaned in beside him. Inside were fragments of reports, coded communiques, and 2 grainy photographs. One showed a narrow building behind a naval warehouse in Soho. The other displayed a group of operatives in uniform, faces blurred, names redacted. What was Q24? I asked. Mycroft sighed, as though the explanation itself taxed his sensibilities. An intelligence asset. Technically, a communications relay disguised as a safe house. During the Sudan campaign, it served as a neutral zone for sensitive exchanges between British operatives and intermediaries from allied factions. That was the surface narrative. In truth, it housed documents too volatile for Admiralty archives, covert blackmail, bribes, intercepted letters, Secrets, in short, that could topple men or ministries. Holmes scanned the contents rapidly. And Lady Ravensbrook? Mycroft nodded. She was stationed there in 1892, courier and codebreaker. One of the best. When the site was decommissioned, she vanished. Rumor held she'd married a Cairo businessman and retired. But I suspected she went deeper, perhaps into private service or something unsanctioned. Holmes tapped a page. This list of ciphered identities, one of the names is Orion. Ring any bells? Mycroft shifted. That alias appeared in for dispatches across 3 years. Never identified. Whoever Orion was, he operated outside official channels and had knowledge of sensitive naval placements. We presumed foreign, but his patterns were familiar. British, possibly internal. Holmes closed the folder. He's surfaced again. So it seems, Mycroft murmured. And if Lady Ravensbrook knew Orion's true identity, then her disappearance is not escape, it is containment. A long silence followed. Finally, Mycroft said, "You must tread carefully. This is not Scotland Yard business. It's darker and older." Holmes stood, pocketing the dossier. "Then I must go to the place where the dark collects Ravensbrook House." Mycroft's eyes narrowed. "You'll find nothing, perhaps. Or perhaps someone's left a false trail, hoping I follow." As we turned to leave, Mycroft added softly, "Sherlock, if Orion has resurfaced, do not underestimate the reach of his shadow." Back in the street, Holmes moved at a clipped pace. "We've been offered a distraction, Watson. Mycroft's information, useful though it is, points us toward a closed chapter. But someone reopened it. That man in Temple Garden, he wasn't confirming a signal. He was testing us. For what?" Holmes didn't answer directly. Instead, he hailed a cab. Ravensbrook House, quickly. The estate, once a stately townhouse near Belgravia, had since fallen into disuse. Lady Ravensbrook had not resided there in over a decade, yet it was still maintained barely by a single groundskeeper. The gate was ajar when we arrived. Inside, the house was cold. White sheets covered most of the furniture, like ghosts frozen mid-dance. Dust lay undisturbed across bookshelves and banisters except, Holmes noted, for a faint trail leading from the main parlor to a side study. He gestured. There, we entered the study, and at once Holmes dropped to his knees. Note the marks on the rug, something heavy was dragged across it. He moved to the bookshelf. "Help me here, Watson." Together, we shifted the largest shelf a few inches aside. Behind it was a small alcove recently cleaned. On the wall was a brass hook, the size and shape of a lantern clasp, but nothing hung there. Holmes stood. Whatever was taken from here, likely a coded ledger, was the real target. And someone has already claimed it, from outside. A sudden voice interrupted. I wouldn't touch anything further. "Mr. Holmes." We turned sharply. Standing in the doorway was a tall man in an inspector's coat. Clean-shaven, with cold blue eyes and polished boots. I recognized him at once. Inspector Instruther of Naval Intelligence. A man whose presence, Holmes once said, was the surest sign that truth had been chained to secrecy. Holmes straightened. "You're late, Anstruther." The inspector's gaze moved slowly over the scene. "Am I? You seem rather early. You're following someone," Holmes said coolly. "Not me, her." Anstruther offered no reply. Lady Ravensbrook trusted no one in uniform. "That would include you. Which means, despite your badge, you're also in the dark." The inspector's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to explain myself, Holmes. I'm here to warn you. Whatever you believe this is, it's worse. And if you keep pushing, you'll find yourself on the wrong end of a sealed report." He turned on his heel and departed, his polished steps echoing like a clock winding toward peril. Holmes watched him go. "A red herring," he murmured. "What, Anstruther?" "No, this entire house. It's a planted trail, meant to make us believe we're ahead." He turned to me. "But I've seen the real trace." I blinked. "Where?" Holmes smiled faintly. "In the dust." Chapter 6. The inconsistency in the dust house stood silent once more after Anstruther's departure, its heavy atmosphere thick with more than just disuse. Holmes remained still for a long moment, his eyes fixed not on the vacant hook in the alcove, nor on the door through which Anstruther had vanished, but on the carpet beneath our feet. Then, slowly, he knelt again and drew out his magnifying lens. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "The drag marks on the carpet are deliberate, neatly linear. Not the erratic scuff one might expect from someone hastily pulling a heavy object." I crouched beside him. "Then someone wanted us to find them, indeed. But here, look more closely." He pointed at a small, faint line of disruption across the pile of the rug, just beside the main trail. This is genuine. A heel mark, lighter than the others, barely a whisper. It cuts across the deliberate track but does not follow it. And it leads. Here, he rose and followed the faint impression across the study and into the adjoining corridor, where the dust lay less disturbed. There, at the base of a faded wallpapered wall, stood a tall grandfather clock long stopped at 17 minutes past 4. Holmes stared at it for a few moments, then ran his fingers along its carved oak frame. With a flick of his wrist, he pushed gently on the side panel. To my astonishment, it gave way with a muted click, revealing a narrow compartment no wider than a man's torso. Inside lay a thin leather portfolio bound with twine. Holmes took it and carried it to the desk, carefully unwrapping the string and laying out its contents. There were 3 items: a folded map, a torn journal page, and an envelope bearing a strange symbol, an eye within a triangle, inked in a peculiar shade of green. Watson reached for the envelope, but Holmes stopped him. Careful. The ink is fresh. It may be laced with a reagent. He held it up to the light. This is not wax-sealed, nor gummed. It's folded thrice, another courier technique, designed to be tamper-evident, and the symbol Masonic in appearance, but altered. Note the dot above the eye. Have you seen it before? Only once. During a case involving naval espionage in Malta. It was a cipher group, a hidden offshoot known only by rumor. They were referred to in whispers as the Echelon. Their existence was never proven, and Lady Ravensbrooke was linked to them. I suspect so now. Holmes turned to the map. It depicted central London, but certain areas had been circled in red. Notably, Soho, Tower Hill, Whitehall, and one more. Here, Holmes said, pointing to a small square near Lambeth. This building is no longer on modern charts. It was razed after the war. But at the time of Q-24's operation, it was a courier drop site, a secure depot hidden beneath a wool merchant's office. He tapped the final circled mark. Bridgewater Wharf. Watson, he said. This map is not simply a list of locations. It's a route, a relay of information, or perhaps escape. Someone has been moving between these places, and not recently. These folds are old, the paper yellowed. This map was prepared before Lady Ravensbrooke vanished. Then she's following this path. Or she intended someone else to. He turned to the final item, the torn journal page. It was brittle and stained, but the writing was legible, penned in a fine hand. The man with the pin was not alone. There was another silent, always in shadow. He never speaks, but when he watches, you feel it. I fear he's the true mind behind this. I must make the drop by Candlemark, if I fail. Let the note in the tea bag be the last word. We sat in silence, the gravity of the message settling upon us like lead. Holmes folded the page. Candlemark. That's old naval code, and are designated by the second lamp after dusk. Tonight, that would be approximately 7:30. He glanced at the map again. Then we go to Bridgewater Wharf at dusk. I looked at him warily. You believe someone will come? I believe someone already has, Holmes said. And if Lady Ravensbrooke left this trail, it was not only for us, it was for her enemy to follow as well. We returned to Baker Street, briefly to prepare. Holmes sent a second wire to Mycroft, instructing him to delay any official movements near Lambeth. Let the game play out, he wrote. We must see who arrives. At 7 o'clock, under the lowering sun. We made our way to Bridgewater Wharf. The area had fallen into decay. What was once a thriving dockside storage hub now stood as a mausoleum of rotting crates, rusted iron gates, and wooden planks bleached by rain. The building in question was a squat, red brick relic with shattered windows and a hanging sign that had once read Bridgewater Wool and Shipping. We slipped inside through a side entrance, our boots muffled against the dust-covered stone. The interior was cavernous, the air thick with the scent of mildew and old rope. Holmes motioned for silence. We took shelter behind a crate stack near the center of the chamber. Then we waited. At precisely 7:30, a door creaked open at the rear. A figure stepped in, dressed in a long coat and wide-brimmed hat. The person moved with care, scanning the shadows. I reached for my revolver, but Holmes stopped me with a hand on my wrist. The figure moved to a wooden post and reached behind it. A hidden panel opened, and the figure placed a small envelope inside. Then they froze. From the darkness opposite us, another shadow moved, slight, quiet, and unmistakably armed. Holmes inhaled sharply. A trap, he whispered, but before he could move, The second figure raised a pistol. A flash, a single shot rang out, echoing across the wharf, and the messenger collapsed beside the post. Holmes sprang from hiding, revolver drawn. "Drop it," he barked, but the shooter had already vanished through the shadows. Slipping into the maze of beams and splinters like smoke, we reached the fallen figure, a young woman. Her breath faint, blood soaking her sleeve. Holmes tore open her coat, checking the wound. "She's alive," he said. "But just barely." He turned to me. "She's not Lady Ravensbrook, but she knows where she is." And then the woman whispered just one word, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Orion." Chapter 7. Echoes beneath the wharf bore the injured woman between us across the Thames fog to a discreet physician Holmes trusted, an old army surgeon in Lambeth named Dr. Stoker, who kept no records and asked no questions. His practice, hidden behind the facade of a bookseller's, served those caught between shadows and law. There, in a candlelit room that smelled of iodine and wet wool, he dressed her wound with quick, capable hands while Holmes stood silent, watching her pale features for any flicker of recognition. "She's lucky," Stoker muttered, threading a needle through flesh. "A few inches to the left, and the bullet would have pierced the lung. As it is, shock, blood loss, a clean exit. She sleep a while." Holmes gave a curt nod and leaned closer to the cot. "But when she wakes, Watson, she will tell us what she meant by Orion." I nodded, still shaken by the swiftness of the shooting, the efficiency of the killer. Not a footfall, not a second shot. Whoever had fired the pistol was not merely intent on silence, they were trained for it. Stoker wiped his hands and stood. "She should regain consciousness by dawn. Keep her still, and do not let her speak too long. Her pulse is weak." Holmes turned to me. "Stay here. Watch over her. If she speaks, record every word. No speculation. And you?" I asked. He pulled on his gloves. "I'm going below, to the tunnels beneath the wharf. They once connected Bridgewater to 3 other storage depots by way of old coal passages. If someone meant to vanish unseen, that's how they did it. Surely the shooter is long gone by now." "Possibly," he said. "But I'm not looking for the man. I'm looking for what he may have dropped or left behind in his haste." And with that, Holmes was gone. It was some hours later, perhaps near 3 in the morning, when Holmes returned. His coat was thick with dust, and his face carried that strange light I had seen only when he was nearest to truth. "I found it," he said simply. He laid a small cloth bundle on the table and unwrapped it. Inside was a set of rubber-soled boots, a black velvet glove, and a single playing card, its surface warped by damp, but the symbol still visible. The Queen of Spades. Holmes stared at it with quiet intensity. "A mark," he said, "left as a calling card of the shooter, of his employer. This was not a random assassin, this was a ritual. The Queen of Spades has long been associated with misfortune and betrayal in military codes. It was used during the Crimean campaign by rogue operatives to mark compromised agents. Whoever left this wanted us to understand something. The woman we found was betrayed. And that betrayal was sanctioned." He turned the card over. Written in tight, curling script was a phrase. "Q24 is not a place. It's a person." I sat up straight. "A person." But Mycroft said her. Mycroft believed Q24 referred to a site. So did I, but this changes the frame entirely. The safe house may have been named for the individual who ran it, an internal code name, kept even from the upper circles. That individual may still be alive, hidden, or hunted. We looked over at the woman. Her face, though pale, had regained some color. Her breathing was steady now. Holmes leaned over and spoke softly. "Do you know who Q24 is?" Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a hoarse whisper, "Not who. What?" Holmes leaned in. "Explain." She coughed, then winced. Her hand tightened around the edge of the blanket. Q24 was a cipher protocol, a method, not a person or place. It was used to identify enemy agents who'd infiltrated British ranks. Holmes froze. "You mean Ravensbrook ran this protocol?" The woman nodded. "She cracked the names, codes, reverse signals. Orion was on that list," Holmes whispered. "So that's why she vanished." The woman's voice was barely audible. "She knew he'd risen. Not foreign. One of ours. Do you know who?" I asked Dot, but her eyes had already closed again. Holmes stood slowly. The lines in his face taut. "We've misunderstood from the start," he said. "Lady Ravensbrook didn't disappear to escape Orion. She disappeared to stop him from the inside. And now, he turned toward the window, where the sky was just beginning to pale with the first shades of dawn. Now we know why she warned us to trust no uniform. I stood. Then who can we trust? Holmes gave a hollow smile. No one. Which means, Watson, the next step must be taken alone. He retrieved the playing card and slid it into his notebook. If Q24 was a method of identification, he said quietly, then somewhere, the original cipher still exists, and you think Ravensbrooke hid it. I think she entrusted it to someone who never knew what they were carrying. He turned back to me. We must return to the Teabag. Chapter 8. The residue of Secret's sun had only just crested the rooftops when we returned to Baker Street. The morning light, usually a welcome invitation to normalcy, cast long, unsettling shadows across the drawing room floor. Holmes moved with brisk precision, brushing aside breakfast untouched as he laid out our tools: tweezers, droppers, a small brass burner, and the disassembled remains of the infamous Teabag from its ruined paper shell. He retrieved the last trace of loose tea leaves just a pinch and scattered them on a black lacquered tray beside the sliver of vellum we had previously extracted. What exactly are we searching for? I asked, suppressing a yawn. A stain, Watson, Holmes replied. Not of tea or ink, but of intention. He took a glass vial from the shelf, a transparent solution tinted faintly purple, and delicately dropped a single bead onto the leaves. The reaction was instantaneous. The leaves smoked lightly, then turned pale blue, exposing faint etchings on the surface of the paper tray. There, Holmes murmured, on the lacquered tray. Faint lines had emerged like an architectural blueprint drawn in milk and smoke. They formed a pattern of intersecting circles and squares, irregular and almost floral. At the center, a diamond-shaped emblem with a vertical slash through its core. Holmes leaned in. It's a cipher wheel, or more precisely, the base ring of one. But not for encryption. For matching. Matching what? Holmes turned to a drawer and retrieved a brass cipher disc from an old velvet pouch. He aligned it with the symbol on the tray. The pattern meshed perfectly. This is a Rosetta wheel, he explained. A decoding device used only in field operations. Each operative carried a different alignment key to unlock unique messages. But this one, it's reversed. Reversed? Holmes rotated the wheel, aligning the central slash to the base mark. A new character appeared through the window of the disc, a narrow loop bisected by a jagged line. That symbol, he said slowly, is not English, nor French. It's taken from a cipher language developed in Prussia during the 1848 uprisings, later adapted by certain rogue elements within British intelligence. I stared at him. Holmes, how do you know this? He gave a dry smile. Because I read everything others burn from a stack of papers near the hearth. He retrieved an obscure monograph, The Language of Shadows, Forgotten Symbols of the Secret Services. Holmes flipped to a marked page and pointed. There, etched in faded ink, was the same symbol. Designation, Code name Orion, Autonomous Operative. Status, Rogue. Clearance, Omega-level. He looked at me grimly. The cipher didn't identify Orion, it authenticated him. Whoever had this Teabag in their possession could prove that Orion was not a myth, but real and active. I swallowed. Then this was no mere warning. It was a death warrant. Holmes stood. We now understand why Lady Ravensbrooke vanished. She needed to protect this fragment long enough to pass it on indirectly. Not to the Yard, nor the Navy, but through misdirection. The hamper that ended up here was never meant for us. You mean it wasn't a mistake? Precisely. It was meant for her cousin in Surrey, yes, but only because the cousin ran a quiet press in Guildford, once used to print encoded wartime communiques. She would have recognized the pattern. But fate or chancery routed it here. He turned to me with quiet intensity. That makes us targets, Watson. I felt the chill run down my spine. And the man in Temple Garden? A handler. Not Orion, perhaps not even aware of Orion's full identity. But clearly part of the network meant to retrieve the message without causing alarm. Holmes pulled out the Queen of Spades and studied it again. This card wasn't just a sign of betrayal. It was left for me. Whoever shot the courier knew I would find her. Which means... He trailed off and turned suddenly toward the desk. They are trying to accelerate my involvement. Accelerate it. I said. But why? Holmes spoke as he paced, mind sharpening visibly. Because they need me to get close to something they themselves cannot. Orion, I suspect, is insulated and known even to his inner circle. But if I begin pulling too strongly, they hope I'll expose him. And when I do, They intend to eliminate us both. At that moment, there was a sharp knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson's voice called gently from the stairwell. "Telegram from Mr. Holmes, sir." Holmes took it with a nod, his eyes scanning the typed message. I watched as the lines around his mouth deepened. "From Mycroft," he said, handing it to me. It read, "Intercepted transmission confirmed. Orion compromised Q2 for protocol 6 days prior to message dispatch. Lady Ravensbrook listed as silenced asset. Presumed dead. Location uncertain. Surveillance breached. All field agents instructed to cease. No further assistance. Consider yourself warned." I looked up. "They've abandoned her." "No," Holmes said. "They've declared her lost." Which is something entirely more convenient. He stared out the window into the thinning mist, fingers drumming lightly on the windowsill. "They're closing the case, Watson. Sealing it. But that is the one thing I will not allow." I stepped beside him. "Then what's next?" Holmes turned to me, his voice calm but flint-edged. "Now, we provoke Orion." He tapped the cipher disk, then reached for his coat. "And to do that, we need to go to the last person who ever saw Lady Ravensbrook alive." I blinked. "But we've no witness." Holmes smiled. "Not a witness, Watson. A survivor." And with that, we left the flat once more into the fog. Into the fire. Chapter 9. The survivor in question, as it turned out, was the footman. We had all but forgotten him amid the din of cipher wheels, secret cotton names, and covert shootings. Yet it was this quiet figure drugged and discarded in an alley the morning Lady Ravensbrook vanished who had seen her last. Holmes had insisted from the beginning that no detail was incidental. Now, with Orion named and the cipher decrypted, the footman's silence loomed too large to ignore. His name was Willard Hensley, a former rifleman turned domestic aide. We located him in a convalescent ward tucked behind the Royal London Hospital, overseen by a matron who recognized Holmes at once and led us down the long, oil-lamped corridor with whispers and wide eyes. "He speaks little, Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "since the incident. Strange things. Says he dreams of empty seats and silver wolves." Holmes nodded. "Those are not dreams, madam. They are memories under disguise." We entered the chamber. The man in the bed was gaunt but alert. His eyes, pale and watery, shifted toward us as we approached. A bandage wrapped the back of his head, but he sat upright, arms folded as though bracing for interrogation. Holmes seated himself at the foot of the bed. "Mr. Hensley," he said gently, "do you remember me?" Hensley nodded. "Just once. You're the one from the carriage. The one who asked about the footprints, correct? And I've come to ask about something else." The moment Lady Ravensbrook vanished, the man was quiet for a beat. Then, slowly, he spoke. "She knew," he said. Holmes tilted his head. "Knew what?" "That they were coming." She said it like one might say rain was coming. Calm, certain. "She asked me to make sure the route to Gower Street was unchanged. Then, she handed me a box of mint lozenges." Holmes blinked. "Lozenges?" Hensley nodded. "Said I was to take one at exactly 5 minutes past noon. No sooner, no later." "And did you?" He gave a ghost of a smile. And that's the last thing I remember. Woke up in the alley, no idea how I got there. No pain, no injury. Just sleep. Deep, black sleep." Holmes and I exchanged glances. "She drugged you," I said, but Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson. She protected him." He turned to Hensley again. "And what of the driver?" Hensley's brow furrowed. "That's the thing. He wasn't our regular man. Said the usual fellow had fallen ill, and this new chap was from the service pool. Clean boots, navy buttons, and a collar pin that didn't match." Holmes stood. "Naval intelligence again," he said. Hensley leaned forward. "There's one more thing. Just before I blacked out, I heard her speak quiet, like a prayer." Holmes froze. "What did she say?" "Tell the Queen I burned it," Hensley whispered. Holmes exhaled sharply. "So the cipher was never meant to be delivered. She destroyed the original protocol. What we found fragments, copies, clues were never the true key." "But then," I asked, "why did she leave behind all these trails?" "To mislead Orion, and to draw someone to her. Someone she trusted could finish the game she began. She meant to disappear, Watson, but not without a witness to her intent." Holmes turned back to Hensley. "You said she knew they were coming. Did she say who?" The footman hesitated. "She didn't have to. She simply said, 'He wears gray, always, like a mourner at a wedding.'" Holmes froze for a long moment. He said nothing. Then, very quietly, he turned to me. "We've seen him, Watson." My breath caught. "The man in Temple Garden." Holmes nodded. His coat was not navy or black. It was gray, an officer's cut but without distinction. It was the absence of allegiance, a uniform for no nation. But he said he wasn't Orion, and he may not be. But he's close. Close enough to pass instructions. Close enough to leave the Queen of Spades. Holmes turned to the matron at the door. "This man is not safe here. He must be relocated to a guarded wing. Under a false name. I'll send word through Mycroft." She gave a nervous nod and retreated. I stepped closer to Holmes. "Where are we going?" "To the opera." "The opera?" He gave a curt smile. "An unusual time, I grant you. But if we wish to draw out a ghost, Watson, we must play familiar music." I stared. "You believe Orion will appear?" "I believe," Holmes said, "that if we announce our presence in a place he once controlled, he will not resist the urge to watch. And when he does," he picked up his coat and revolver, "we will watch him back." As we descended the stairs of the hospital into the street, Holmes stopped for just a moment and glanced at the skyline. "Burned it," he murmured. "She burned the code, but she didn't burn the names." I glanced at him. "Then where are they?" He turned his eyes to the morning sun. "Somewhere Orion cannot reach. But we can." And we stepped once more into the shifting light of London, hunting now not for evidence, but for the phantom in the gray coat who had walked too many steps ahead until now. Chapter 10. The Ghost in the Velvet Box. Holmes and I arrived at Covent Garden just before the matinee crowd. It was a curious time to visit the Royal Opera House, and Holmes had timed it precisely for that reason. Too early for the evening's patrons, too late for stagehands to still linger. The building hummed in quiet preparation, curtains drawn halfway, doors ajar, and voices distant like memories rehearsed. We entered through a service entrance on the southern side, Holmes having acquired a narrow brass key from an unnamed source. Within moments, we were in the velvet-lined corridor that led behind the stage, past dressing rooms that had seen monarchs and madmen disguised alike. "Why here?" I asked in a hushed tone. Holmes moved ahead without slowing. "Lady Ravensbrooke once performed here not as a singer, but as a decoy. In 1891, during the Port Said interception, she was part of a naval sting operation. She used the Royal Opera House's backstage corridor to pass a forged manifesto to a German courier. The drop was made during a Strauss overture, as the audience drowned in crescendo. The box used for that exchange remains here, box 5. He gestured up a stairwell, and if Orion was ever near her, Holmes continued, he would have learned her methods. If he suspects she left behind anything, he will come here. Even if only to confirm it is truly gone. We reached the door to box 5, a private balcony overlooking the stage. The interior was unlit, the curtains drawn. Holmes stepped in first, his eyes adjusting quickly. I followed, finding the box precisely as he described, to velvet chairs, a gilt-framed mirror, and a narrow table with a lacquered drawer beneath. Holmes moved straight to the drawer. It opened with a whisper. Inside was nothing but a black silk glove folded. He turned it over. A slip of parchment was tucked beneath the fingers. Holmes read it aloud. "What she destroyed, I restored. But only one name matters now. Come to where the moon strikes the river wall." I stared at him. "He's baiting you." Holmes nodded. "And very skillfully. The glove was hers. That slip was not. The ink is fresh less than 6 hours. He was here this morning, where the moon strikes the river wall." "That could be anywhere." "No," Holmes said. "It's specific. There's only one place in London known for such a site. Just west of Waterloo Bridge, where the embankment curves inward, the full moon casts a direct reflection on the river wall for precisely 20 minutes. Poets and romantics call it the silver hour, but for men like Orion." He pocketed the glove. "It's a sniper's clock." We left the theater quickly, retracing our steps through the echoing halls. Holmes's urgency was sharp now, like a blade unsheathed. Outside, the day had darkened. A mist had returned, thickening along the Thames like spilled ink. The moon, waxing and pale, had risen above the rooftops, faint but certain. We reached the designated spot with 5 minutes to spare. It was a quiet bend on the embankment, where 2 gas lamps flickered near a rusted iron railing. A low stone wall ran beside the river's edge, glistening faintly with the moon's mirrored light. Holmes motioned for silence. We crouched behind a mooring post, watching, and then a silhouette emerged. The man wore a gray coat, wide-brimmed hat, hands in pockets. He stood in the moonlight, unmoving. Holmes whispered, "Do not act. Watch." The figure removed something from his coat, a small object wrapped in cloth. He placed it upon the stone wall and stepped back. Then he turned and vanished into the fog. Holmes waited several seconds before approaching. I followed, every sense heightened. Upon the stone wall, beneath the sheen of moonlight, lay a small velvet box. Holmes opened it. Inside was a ring. A woman's ring. Simple, gold, and unadorned save for a single engraving on the inner band, to ER. Until the signal breaks, Holmes stared at it, lips parted. "ER," I murmured. "Her initials." Holmes nodded. "Evelyn Ravensbrook." "But this ring. I've seen it before." He turned to me. "She wore it always until the day she vanished." I looked down at the band. "Then he's taunting you again." "No," Holmes said. "He's confirming something." He closed the box. "She's alive." I blinked. "How do you know?" Holmes turned to me, eyes sharp, because if she were dead, he would never let me believe otherwise. Orion plays games of fear, of control, of silence, but never hope. Hope is a weapon he would not hand me. We stood there a moment longer, the wind tugging at our collars, the city groaning in its sleepless breath. Then Holmes turned away from the river. He left this message, knowing I'd follow. "That means the next move is mine. But I cannot make it blind." He reached into his coat and retrieved the cipher disk once more. "It's time," he said, "to ask Mycroft what he didn't tell us, and if he refuses." Holmes smiled faintly. "Then I'll remind him that even the Diogenes Club cannot hide the moonlight forever." As we turned back toward Baker Street, I glanced once more at the velvet box still clutched in Holmes's hand. A ring, a signal, and a promise not yet broken. Chapter 11. Beneath the silence of the Diogenes. Next morning found us once again at the formidable doors of the Diogenes Club. The facade, as always, gave nothing away. It loomed like a mausoleum to discretion, moving, impassive, and sealed tightly against the noise of the world. Inside, conversation was still considered vulgar. Information, however, flowed in a quiet current. Like a stream beneath polished marble, Holmes and I were admitted without delay, and escorted through the hallowed silence to a narrow chamber at the rear, smaller than Mycroft's usual rooms. With no fireplace, only a single oil lamp, and a table cleared of all but 2 cups of tea and a tightly rolled scroll, Mycroft Holmes was already seated. Arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He did not rise as we entered. "Sherlock," he said simply, "you should not have gone to the river." "And yet I did," Holmes replied, taking the opposite chair. "And you knew I would," Mycroft sighed. "Which is why I left the box untouched." I stared. "You." Holmes held up a hand. "Let him speak." Mycroft unfolded the scroll and passed it across the table. It revealed a single name, written in a hand I recognized at once, Lady Ravensbrook's. Beneath it, in smaller script, Q20 for protocol dissolved. Ring transferred to neutral. Operation ends upon signal confirmation. Holmes examined it. So she initiated the termination. But why confirm it with Orion's ring? "She didn't," Mycroft said. "You're assuming she left it." "I believe Orion did, to mislead me, to mark her as finished, to declare her silent to anyone watching. It is a warning to stand down, even for us." Holmes's fingers tightened around the edge of the scroll. "And you believe it?" "I believe she's still alive," Mycroft said flatly. "But I also believe she is no longer acting in the interest of the Crown." I leaned forward. "Then what is she doing?" Mycroft turned his eyes on me. "She's executing a private vendetta, Dr. Watson. And her silence now protects someone other than England," Holmes scoffed. "That's the conclusion you draw? After all she gave?" "Sherlock," Mycroft said softly, "do not forget who she was trained by. Loyalty is malleable. Intent, elusive. Even love can be leveraged." Holmes stood, pacing. "Orion lives." The cipher confirmed it. The Teabag was a transmission, not a relic. Ravensbrook has burned the original code, yes, but not the names. And she wants him found. "Then you will need this," Mycroft said from beneath the table. He withdrew a slender black folder, tied shut with a green ribbon. Holmes accepted it without opening it. "It's a list of those still under surveillance. All operatives formerly connected to Q24, some clean, some dormant, 1 or 2, recently reactivated. If Orion walks among them, the name will be there." "And the catch?" Holmes asked. Mycroft's eyes narrowed. "The moment you read this, you are in breach of the Quiet Charter. That means if you're caught, I cannot help you." Holmes met his brother's gaze with equal steel. "You never could." With that, Holmes turned and left the room. I followed, offering Mycroft a hesitant glance before closing the door behind us. Back in Baker Street, Holmes untied the folder slowly. Inside were 13 names, some familiar, others unfamiliar, all tied in one way or another to the old naval intelligence framework. He scanned down the list, lips barely moving. Edward Blackamore. To dead. Anna Withrow. Retired. Under observation. James Luthers. He stopped. Here, he said. He tapped a name. Colonel Jasper Frey. Frey, I echoed. That man was dismissed from active intelligence 5 years ago. Not dismissed, Holmes murmured. Folded inward. Promoted sideways into a non-existent post. He was the handler for Eastern Cipher Division, Ravensbrook's original command. And he vanished from records around the same time she did. I leaned in. Do you think he's Orion? Holmes did not answer at once. He stared at the name, then slowly turned the paper over. What do we know about a man who's erased himself? He said at last. Only that he fears discovery, and respects it enough to bury his own trail twice. Holmes rose, fetched a tattered ledger from the shelf, and opened it to a folded note. It was a scribbled address, given to us months ago by a disgraced operative during an unrelated affair. Holmes had filed it under inconclusive yet curious. Jasper Frey, he said, keeps a flat under the name Langston, above a defunct bookshop in Hampstead. I thought it curious at the time. He closed the ledger with a snap. We pay him a visit tonight. But Holmes, I said, if he is Orion, then I intend, Holmes said quietly, to look into the face of the man who turned silence into a weapon. That evening, as the gaslights flickered across the city, we set out once more, no longer chasing a cipher or a whisper, but a name buried in bureaucracy, and a shadow possibly wearing a man's skin. As we crossed through fog toward Hampstead, I saw Holmes's eyes narrow, not with certainty, but with a stillness I had seen only once before. When we had hunted Jack Tapley through the swamps of Dartmoor. He was ready, but I could not shake the cold thought, if Frey truly was Orion, then perhaps, just perhaps, we were no longer the hunters. We were the final clue in someone else's design. Chapter 12. The flat with no echo reached the Hampstead address shortly after 9. The fog, which had been a whisper all evening, had grown into a thick woolen veil, muffling our footfalls and swallowing the glow of street lamps until they resembled distant lanterns lost at sea. Holmes walked with steady purpose, his eyes fixed on the upper windows of the bookshop. It was a narrow building, 2 stories high, wedged between a milliner's and an apothecary. The shop front bore no signage. Dust coated the glass in thick streaks, and a single cobweb fluttered in the corner of the pane. Above, the window to the 2nd floor flat was dark, but ajar. Holmes motioned silently for me to follow. Around the side, past a rusting iron fence, we found the tradesman's door. It was locked, but Holmes produced a thin strip of steel and had it open within moments. We slipped inside, boots landing on bare floorboards so gently that even the creak of age seemed reluctant to betray us. Inside, the shop was hollow. Empty shelves lined the walls, but no books remained, only the scent of old glue, rotting paper, and time. Holmes climbed the stairs without pause. At the landing, we found a corridor of doors, 2 to the left, 1 to the right. Holmes approached the latter. The handle bore faint scratches, recent, deliberate. He drew his revolver. Then he opened the door. The flat was bare, yet unmistakably lived in. A kettle sat on the stove, warm to the touch. A threadbare chair faced a desk with a lamp still faintly glowing. Papers, carefully arranged, lay atop it and read, untouched, except by their curator, but there was no one in sight. Holmes entered first. I followed, pistol drawn. My nerves were taut. Each floorboard's creak sent electricity along my spine. Someone left in a hurry, Holmes murmured. He moved to the desk and examined the papers. It's a ledger, he said. Coded, naval cipher, but modified with an old Prussian overlay. Only one operative was known to use this system after 1892. Frey? I asked. Holmes nodded. This is his hand. He's been tracking agents, dead drops, false locations, abandoned cells. This isn't a living flat, it's a control room. He turned a page, then stopped. I saw his brow furrow. What is it? I asked. He passed the sheet to me. In Frey's precise handwriting was a single sentence, circled and annotated with dates. 2 to 1. Be notified. Diversion achieved. Ravensbrook secured. Next contact, Diogenes. If silent, proceed to final measure. My hand tightened around the paper. They knew we intercepted the Teabag. Worse, Holmes said. They expected it. This was never about misdirection. It was a calculated transfer. We were meant to inherit Ravensbrook's trail. To do what? To flush out the last name. I frowned. What name? Holmes gestured to the final entry on the ledger. A single line. Omega-6. Confirmed. Still at large. Not yet activated. Beneath it, a cotton name. Argent. Before I could speak, we heard a creak from the stairwell. Holmes was already in motion. He crossed the flat in 2 strides, pushed me toward the shadows, and stood against the wall near the door. We waited. Breath halted. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall, lean, wrapped in gray. The man stepped inside, quietly. The same coat, the same hat. Holmes struck like lightning. He seized the man's wrist, wrenched the pistol free, and drove him into the wall with a force that shook dust from the ceiling. The hat fell. I stepped forward and gasped. It was not Frey. The man was younger. Early 30s, sharp-eyed, and terrified. Who are you? Holmes growled. The man's voice trembled. I'm not Orion. I was sent to monitor the ledger. That's all. Please, you're not supposed to be here. Holmes narrowed his eyes. Where is Frey? I don't know. No one's seen him since the ring was left. Holmes turned to me. Watson, check the drawer. I opened the drawer beneath the desk. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, was a revolver and a sealed envelope bearing Holmes's name. I passed it to him. He tore it open and read quickly. Then he went still. What is it? I asked. Holmes read aloud. Mr. Holmes, if you are reading this, then the game has reached its final turn. I am gone. The cipher was never in my possession. It was embedded in the one asset Orion could not control. Lady Ravensbrook is alive, but not free. Argent is not a person. Argent is the contingency, the final measure, if all else fails. A memory, a map. Embedded not in ink or code, but in the mind of a man you trust. He must remember. Before Orion finds him first, Frey. Holmes folded the notes slowly. His face had turned grave. Watson, he said, voice low. The cipher was never meant to be decrypted. It was meant to be remembered. I stared at him. By whom? Holmes met my eyes. You. The floor beneath me seemed to tilt. Me. You served with Ravensbrook's unit during your hospital post in Cairo. She would have entrusted it to someone expendable, someone who would never suspect he carried it. Not in papers, but in pattern, in routine, in a memory filed as ordinary. I felt my breath catch. But I remember nothing. Not yet, Holmes said. But you will. We must return to Baker Street, and if I can't recall it, I asked. Holmes picked up the revolver from the drawer. Then Orion will. The shadows in the room deepened, and I knew, from the cold behind Holmes's eyes, that the real hunt had only just begun. Chapter 13. The cipher in the wound back at Baker Street. Holmes moved with a ferocity I had seldom seen. Not rage, never that, but a sharpened urgency, like a man tracing smoke in a room filling with fire. He drew the curtains, bolted the door, and cast the revolver onto the desk before lighting every lamp in the flat until the walls glowed with golden tension. I stood dumbfounded near the hearth, my mind turning over the final words of Frey's letter like coins falling endlessly through my fingers. A memory, embedded not in ink or code, but in the mind of a man you trust. It didn't seem possible. I had no recollection of anything secret, nothing of value, certainly nothing worthy of being called a cipher. Holmes placed both hands on my shoulders, staring into my eyes with unsettling calm. Watson, he said, I need you to trust me without hesitation. You have that always, I replied. Then sit. Close your eyes. I obeyed, lowering myself into the armchair where Holmes so often ruminated. The room fell still. Tell me, he said gently, everything you remember about your time at the Cairo Field Hospital in the spring of '92. Not the reports, not the patients, the moments between, the meaningless details. Begin anywhere. I inhaled, letting memory drift forward. There was heat. I murmured. Dust. The windows never opened fully, and the sound of camel bells came in the evenings. We had a nurse, French, I think, used to hum arias as she worked, and the orderlies smoked constantly clove cigarettes. Holmes remained quiet. I continued. There was a young lieutenant from Sussex with a head wound. He refused laudanum, said it dulled his dreams. I changed his dressings for 3 weeks straight. Holmes leaned closer. What else? He had a ring, I said suddenly. A woman's ring. Wore it on a chain. Said it belonged to his sister. But one day it disappeared. I asked, and he said, It's where it needed to go. Holmes froze. His name. I hesitated. He was only recorded by initials. Holmes exhaled. Evelyn Ravensbrook, disguised, wounded in the field. I stared. That was her. She trusted you even then. She placed the cipher in your presence, perhaps not directly, but in repetition. She knew you would never recall it consciously, but it would root in your mind through routine. He turned to the desk, opening a drawer and pulling forth a tattered leather notebook. Mine. Holmes flipped through the entries from that spring and stopped at a page nearly worn through at the spine. You wrote this. Watson, he said. Read it aloud. I leaned forward, recognizing my hand, but not the words. March 19th. ER again insists on same routine. White bandage. Iodine cross, compress soaked in boiled water. Turn left, walk 10 paces, return every evening, always at dusk. Says it calms her. Holmes was already drawing on the chalkboard beside the fireplace. White, cross, boil. Turn, 10, return. Dusk. He underlined the key words. She was feeding you sequence. A pattern. A cipher protocol encoded through medical routine. But that makes no sense, I said. These are ordinary things. To you, yes. To her, no. Watch. Holmes assigned numerical values to the words, substituting letters with their positions in the alphabet. W, C, B, T, T, R, D. Then he arranged them on a grid 7 characters. Spaced precisely. He stood back. W, C, B, T, T, R, D. He murmured aloud. West Cavendish Bridge, Turn Tower, Ravensbrook Dock. I felt the hairs on my neck rise. It's a map. Holmes nodded. A list of sites connected to the Q-to-4 relay. Locations Ravensbrook used as dead drops or surveillance points. The order is crucial. It's a route. I blinked. And where does it lead? Holmes drew a line across the grid, forming a zigzag. It leads, he said, to Dockside Repository Number 6, Tower Hill, officially condemned. But once used by naval intelligence to store classified assets. But why encode that location in my memories? Because it held something she couldn't destroy. Something she feared Orion would seek. I sat back, stunned. And what is it? Holmes turned to me, eyes cold and clear. The original ledger. The one before it was burned. I felt my pulse quicken. Then she didn't destroy it? She made us believe she had. He folded the notebook shut and turned back to his coat. We must move now. If we deciphered this, someone else may have too. Orion doesn't need the whole code, only enough to anticipate our path. But how would he at that moment? The front window shattered. A small metal object tumbled onto the floor, clattering across the rug before coming to rest. With a faint hiss, Holmes shouted, "Down!" Smoke erupted from the cylinder, acrid, white, blinding. I dropped behind the desk as Holmes threw a cloth over the object and kicked it toward the hearth. The room filled with choking fog, but no explosion came, only silence. Then, from the broken window, a voice, low, male, and unmistakably calm. "You're too late. Mr. Holmes, the name you seek no longer matters." A pause. "She burned it, yes? But I watched her memory walk out in your shadow." Holmes stepped into the smoke. "Then come take it, Orion." But there was no reply, only the echo of boots fading into the mist outside. When the air cleared, Holmes turned to me. "We leave now." "Tower Hill." I nodded, coughing. "And if Orion reaches it first?" Holmes's jaw tightened. "Then we may be recovering the names from a corpse. Or leaving our own." He took my notebook, still warm from my hands, and slipped it into his coat. Then we vanished once more into the night. Toward Tower Hill, toward a past that refused to stay buried, and toward a cipher carried not in ink, but in blood. Chapter 14. The door beneath Tower Hill at night was an altogether different creature, brooding, still, and shrouded in a darkness that seemed less like the absence of light and more like the accumulation of centuries. The stone bulwarks of the tower loomed nearby, silent witnesses to executions and secrets alike. But Holmes paid no attention to the battlements or history. His eyes were fixed on the river's edge, where rusted moorings and discarded barrels marked the fringe of Dockside Repository #6. The place was a ruin in all but name. Officially condemned, the structure had once served as a naval warehouse, then later as an evidence lockup during the Channel smuggling trials. Its foundations ran deeper than most knew, cut into the soft riverbank, descending into layered vaults that had not seen sunlight in decades. We reached the iron gate that guarded the lower entrance. Holmes paused, running his hand over the lock. "New scratches," he muttered. "Someone forced this recently." He produced a small keyring, selected a curved tool, and had the gate open within seconds. Inside, the air was damp and stale. We descended narrow stairs, slick with moss and mold, the faint scent of salt and gunpowder clinging to the stones. Holmes held a lantern aloft, its glow slicing through the gloom. At the bottom of the staircase, we reached a wide chamber half submerged, half dry. Old crates and chains hung like skeletons from rusted hooks. The walls were lined with faded naval markings, painted in red. Dock 6B restricted access. Holmes turned to me. The map encoded in your memory led here. But it wasn't just a location. It was a pattern of movement, a method of bypassing the traps built into the relay. Traps, he nodded. Lady Ravensbrooke feared Orion enough to protect the names, not just with concealment but with danger. Every wrong turn in this vault could trigger a false lead. Or a fatal one. He stepped carefully across the stone floor and paused at 3 identical crates, stacked in a corner. All bore the seal of the Royal Navy, but only one had a chalk marking, a faint X drawn in an elegant hand. Holmes opened it. Inside was a leather-bound satchel, sealed in oilskin. A faint scent rose from it, lavender and copper. Holmes removed the satchel and placed it on the ground. He opened it slowly. There were 2 items inside, a small steel locket and a thin notebook bound with a red ribbon. Holmes turned the locket over. Engraved on the back were the initials ER and the phrase, "Speak truth when they listen least." He set it aside and opened the notebook. The first page bore a single word, Argent. The next was a list. Not long but precise. Names, ranks, codes. Half of them crossed out in red. The ledger, I whispered. Holmes nodded. The true one. She hid it here, beneath the very feet of the one man who sought it most. Ravensbrooke always did prefer irony. We had no time to celebrate. A footstep echoed above. US. Then another. Holmes extinguished the lantern. We waited. The steps grew louder, descending the stone stair with a predator's patience. A figure emerged at the threshold. His coat was gray. His eyes, when they caught the spill of moonlight from the stair, were unmistakable. Holmes rose slowly. Colonel Frey. The man stepped into view, but he didn't speak. Not at first. Then, in a voice stripped of artifice, he said, "The cipher dies with you." Holmes took 1 step forward. "You are not Orion." "No," Frey replied. "I was his silence, his right hand, his absence. The man himself no longer walks among us." I stepped beside Holmes. "Then why come now?" Frey's voice held no anger, only gravity. "Because I must finish what he began." He drew a revolver. Holmes did not flinch. "You'll not find the names again. Not in time. This ledger is encoded with another layer." Frey took 1 step forward. "Then give it to me." Holmes did something unexpected. He tossed the notebook into the flooded portion of the chamber. Frey moved instinctively toward the water. That was all Holmes needed. He lunged, catching Frey's arm mid-motion, twisting the revolver upward. A shot rang out, ricocheted, and the chamber filled with the thunder of violence. I rushed forward, seized Frey's other arm, and together we wrestled him to the floor. Holmes struck with surgical precision, once to the wrist, once to the neck. Frey collapsed, breathing, but unconscious. Holmes retrieved the revolver and tossed it aside. Then he turned back to the flooded pool. The notebook floated on the surface, unharmed. He plucked it free and held it aloft, water streaming from the oilskin. "A good trick," I murmured. Holmes exhaled. "One she would have approved of." We dragged Frey up the stair and into the night, where the mist still hung over Tower Hill like a lowered curtain. Minutes later, Inspector Lestrade arrived, summoned by Holmes's earlier telegram. Frey was taken into custody without ceremony. Lestrade looked at Holmes with reluctant admiration. "Do I even ask what this was about?" Holmes handed him the locket. "Tell Mycroft this was the price of silence, and let him decide if it was worth paying." Lestrade nodded and disappeared into the fog with his prisoner. Holmes and I remained, and for a moment, all was still. Then Holmes spoke. "Lady Ravensbrooke lives. Of that, I am now certain. But whether she will ever return—" He trailed off. "She left us enough," I said quietly, "to finish what she started." Holmes nodded. "Then pass me the ledger." "You remembered what mattered," he said. I looked down at the names, some familiar, others lost to time. All of them carried a weight. And in that moment, I knew we had stepped beyond the usual realm of deduction and evidence. We had walked into the machinery behind empires, where silence was currency and memory. A weapon. We turned from the river. Back into the light. Chapter 15. The Cipher Beneath the Wind. 3 days later. Holmes and I stood at the base of the Tower of the Wines in Athens, an octagonal marble structure that had once served as a clock tower, weather vane, and celestial observatory. The city sweltered under the Mediterranean sun, yet the air near the tower felt cooler, as though history itself exhaled through its stone. Locals passed it by, without a second glance, and tourists few in this season lingered only for photographs. But Holmes was focused not on the structure's elegance or mythology. He was here for what had been built beneath it. The brass token Langston had given us bore an inscription around the lion's mane. Greek letters that translated as, "What time forgets, pattern preserves." Holmes had traced the phrase to a pre-Byzantine network of catacombs beneath the Plaka district. According to his sources, or rather, those of Mycroft, these chambers had long ago been sealed by the Crown during the height of 19th century British exploration in the region. It was here that Lady Ravensbrook's last unbroken thread pointed, a place not merely out of sight, but outside time. Holmes examined the western facade of the tower. The wind gods carved into the stone above each of the 8 sides watched us in silence, their marble garments swirling in frozen breath. "There," Holmes murmured. He pointed to a small iron panel recessed beside the base, half concealed by ivy. It bore no marking, save for a shallow depression the size of the brass token. He pressed the token into the slot. A faint metallic click. We waited. Then, with a barely audible sigh, the panel slid inward, revealing a staircase of smooth stone spiraling down into shadow. "After you, Watson." I lit our lantern, and we descended. The passage was narrow and steep. The air grew cooler with every step, until it carried a damp, mineral scent, ancient and undisturbed. The stone walls bore etchings, some familiar, some obscure, mathematical spirals, star charts, even fragments of naval cipher systems arranged in geometries that mimicked constellations. "What is this place?" I whispered. Holmes answered without turning. "A sanctuary of patterns. Before modern code, before ink, there was rhythm, repetition, structure. Ravensbrook knew this. She came here not to record the cipher, but to embed it. Not in language, but in space." We emerged into a domed chamber lit faintly from above by a hidden oculus. The walls were lined with concentric rings of script, some Greek, others more modern, though fragmented and woven with numeric riddles. At the center of the room stood a pedestal. Upon it rested a device. It was unlike anything I had seen. A brass ring, affixed to a rotating base, surrounded by 8 dials marked with alternating letters, compass points, and planetary symbols. Holmes stepped forward. "This is the final wheel." He reached into his coat and retrieved Ravensbrook's steel locket, the one recovered from Dockside Vault 6. He opened it, revealing not a portrait, but a tiny etched disc. He placed it on the device, with a hum. The dials clicked once, then again. The outer ring began to rotate of its own accord, aligning letters and symbols in a slow, deliberate pattern. Holmes studied it in silence. After several rotations, the device halted. A slot opened at the pedestal's base. Inside was a sealed envelope. Holmes lifted it gently. On the front was a single word, "Sherlock." He opened it and read. As he did, I watched something shift in his expression, something rare. Not shock, not fear, but something close to sorrow. He handed me the note. "My dear Holmes, if you have come this far, then I trust the ledger is safe. But you are wrong about Orion. There was no single man. Orion was always a circle, a collective forged from the remnants of broken alliances. I discovered it too late. I gave the cipher to Watson not because I trusted only him, but because I knew he would never believe it belonged to him. The names were real. But the greater truth is buried here, in this room. In the pattern you must now decode. One among you still bears the mark. The mark is not a scar, nor a sign, but a choice. You will know them when they hesitate." I stared at the words, heart pounding. Holmes turned slowly, surveying the chamber. "She never wanted us to expose Orion," he said, "only to understand it. To know that true control exists not in the hand, but in the hesitation." He began inspecting the walls now, tracing the concentric rings. "Watson," he said suddenly, "help me count these inscriptions starting from the symbol of Aquarius." We moved along the ring, counting. 18, I said. Holmes nodded. "Then she's aligned it to the date of the charter breach." He adjusted the device's outer ring to match the sequence of letters from the ledger entries W, C, B, T, T, R, D, and then rotated the planetary symbols to match the date March 18, 1892. The floor beneath the pedestal shuddered. A second compartment opened. Inside, A pocket watch, the same Ravensbrook had once worn on a chain in Cairo. Holmes lifted it, turned it over, etched on the back. Argent ends where silence begins. He held it to his ear. It ticked not in seconds, but in threes. Tick, tick, tick. Pause, tick, tick, tick. Holmes froze. That rhythm, he said. I've heard it before. Where? I asked. He turned to me, eyes dark and unreadable. In someone's voice, a long silence passed between us. Then Holmes whispered, Langston. The weight of the revelation sank into us both. He had not hesitated in the candlelight room, but he had in Hampstead. When we mentioned the locket, when we spoke of Ravensbrook, he's not just the watchmaker, I murmured. He's the final cipher. Holmes nodded. And he's not finished yet. We climbed the stairs from the tower, stepping once more into the Athenian light. The game was not over. We had unlocked the code. But someone still held the key. Chapter 16. The man who spoke in Threso returned to London under false names. Holmes, ever vigilant, booked separate cabins for the voyage and altered our travel schedule twice en route. Though no official body pursued us, the unspoken understanding was clear. Those who reached the Tower of the Wines uninvited were not expected to return. When we stepped once more into the drizzle of Baker Street, the world appeared unchanged. But everything had shifted. Langston, the watchmaker with the soft voice and ink-stained hands, the man who said little but watched much, Holmes, had replayed their every encounter a dozen times on the journey home, his gaze often distant as he traced unseen constellations across the deck with a finger. The clue, it turned out, had not been the rhythm itself, but how Langston had echoed it. His voice, Holmes realized, always fell into a pattern. 3 words. A pause. 3 more. A rhetorical meter. Artificial. Tick, 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 pause. Even his brief answers to Holmes's questions now struck us as rehearsed. I kept time. Pause. That rhythm mattered. Pause. He hadn't simply explained the cipher. He had spoken like it, and now, it was time to confront him. It was just past 11 when we reached Langston's shop in Westminster, a modest storefront on a quiet side street, nestled between a tobacconist and an antiquarian print dealer. The sign above the door still read Langston and Sons, timepieces restored, but there were no Sons. Holmes had checked. The bell chimed softly as we entered. Rows of clocks ticked in gentle disharmony along the walls, some grand and ornate, others delicate and skeletal. The air smelled of oil, brass, and damp wool. In the center of the room sat Langston, polishing the face of a gold pocket watch beneath a GASLAMP. He looked up without surprise. Mr. Holmes, he said. Dr. Watson. 3 words. Holmes offered no pleasantries. You didn't expect us so soon. Langston folded a cloth and placed the watch gently aside. Sooner than I hoped. Again. 3. Holmes stepped forward. You were there, weren't you? In Athens, not in body, but in design. That chamber, those patterns, they mirrored your voice. Langston gave the faintest smile. Evelyn's idea, not mine. Holmes narrowed his eyes. But you helped shape it. The cipher, the contingency, Argent. Langston said nothing. Holmes continued. Orion was never a single man. Ravensbrook discovered that too late. But you always knew. The smile faded. I knew the circle, Langston said quietly. But not its face. Then what were you? I asked. One of them. Langston turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something new in his gaze, not cunning, but weariness. I was their silence, he said, as Frey claimed. But unlike Frey, I knew when to stop. Holmes studied him. So you broke away? Langston nodded once. In '89, after they removed Lenton and called it an accident, I left the field, set up this shop, thought I could wait out the fire. But Ravensbrook found me. She always found what others missed. Holmes paced the floor slowly, glancing at the ticking clocks. You helped her build the cipher. I helped her forget it, Langston replied. We designed it as a rhythm, an act of misdirection, to store names in patterns, not paper, so no one could possess it, not even her. But she gave a part to me, I said quietly. Langston nodded. The safest place was in a man who didn't know he had it. Holmes crossed to the workbench and picked up a small brass timepiece. So why bring us in at all? Why not let the trail fade with Frey? Langston's voice grew softer. Because something changed. A name reappeared. One not on the original list. One that shouldn't have returned. Holmes turned. Who? Langston hesitated. Then, with quiet finality, he said, Mycroft Holmes, The silence was absolute. I looked at Holmes. He did not blink. Langston continued. It was only in the background. A signature on a sealed directive. A pattern of meetings between naval remnants and commercial intermediaries. Ravensbrooke suspected it. She feared he had been drawn into the circle or that he was using it. Holmes spoke evenly. And what do you believe? Langston met his gaze. I believe Mycroft built a fence to keep the beast in. But I don't know if he's still guarding it or feeding it. Holmes's hands tightened at his sides. We need proof, he said. Not riddles, Langston nodded. Then take this. He reached beneath the counter and produced a velvet pouch. Inside was a steel key, small and worn. Along its shaft, 4 digits were etched. 7014. Langston spoke quietly. Private locker. King's Cross Station. Lower level. She left it with me the day she vanished. Said it would contain the end of the circle. Holmes took the key. Langston's voice dropped to a whisper. She trusted you, Holmes. Not for your mind, but for your refusal to be used. Another pause. Then, for the first time, he broke his rhythm. I can't help you anymore. Holmes gave a curt nod. Then your silence has served its purpose. We left the shop at once. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the street was slick with reflection. Holmes paused beneath a flickering gas lamp. No more questions, he said. Only answers. He turned to me. Tomorrow, we go to King's Cross, and if what we find there confirms what he said. I asked. Holmes didn't answer at first. Then he spoke. Not to me, but to the air around us. Then the circle is wider than we ever feared, and we walked into the night, holding a key not just to a locker, but to the final betrayal. Chapter 17. The tune that could not end. Days that followed were marked not by dramatic pronouncements, but by a deep and deliberate quiet. Sherlock Holmes resumed his routines. The morning paper folded precisely at the corner. A single slice of toast half-eaten at midday. The occasional hum of his violin drifting through the walls of Baker Street like smoke. But something fundamental had shifted. He no longer spoke of puzzles. No longer chased shadows, and though Scotland Yard sent word twice regarding new cases of great national concern, Holmes declined both. I find, he said one morning as I entered with tea, that some threads are not meant to be pulled, Watson. Not any more. And then he said no more. But I knew the truth, for it lived not in his words, but in the ashes still swept faintly into the corners of our hearth. The ledger, the names, the cipher, all of it now gone in smoke, buried beneath the surface of a London that would never know what had nearly passed through it. That was, perhaps, the greatest mystery Holmes had ever solved, and the only one he had chosen to leave unsolved in the eyes of the world. Still, there was one final question I could not leave unspoken. It came to me on a cold Thursday. As I sorted through old files in the bureau, I stumbled across a document half forgotten and unmarked, the patient intake report from the Cairo hospital, dated March 1892. There it was, AGAI-NER, no name, no family listed. Just a single entry in my own handwriting. Head wound, treated for 5 nights. No visitors. Discharged before sunrise. I took the page to Holmes, setting it gently on his desk. He looked at it for a long time, then up at me. I always wondered, I said, if I truly met her there. If that's why she trusted me. Holmes studied the faded page, his eyes lost in its margins. You didn't just meet her, Watson, he said quietly. You saved her, without knowing. And she repaid you the only way she could, by ensuring you never became part of the game until you had to. But why me? I asked. Why not you? Holmes gave a small, sad smile. Because I would have broken the circle. You carried it. I felt the weight of those words. The ledger we never reopened. The names we never spoke aloud. And then Holmes said something I would never forget. Truth is not always about revelation, Watson. Sometimes it's about stewardship. You kept the truth until it could be buried properly. That is its own kind of justice. He stood then, stretched, and turned toward the window, outside. The street bustled, as it always had, vendors shouting, carriages rolling, chimney smoke curling into a gray London sky. Life moved on. Holmes took a breath and said, almost to himself, perhaps I will take up the violin again. You've time for it now, I offered. He nodded, but his gaze remained distant. I've always wondered, he said after a long pause, if the tune she left was still playing. I frowned. You mean the code? No, Watson, Holmes said with a rare gentleness. I mean her, Evelyn Ravensbrooke, whether she walks somewhere still free of the burden, listening to the silence she finally earned. And do you think she does? Holmes gave the smallest shrug. She was always better at vanishing than I. We sat in companionable silence after that. No more mysteries. No more ledger. No more names. Only memory. And perhaps that was enough. The public never learned what passed beneath the Tower of the Wines, nor what was sealed in Locker 7014. The official record listed Colonel Frey's arrest as failure to report foreign affiliations, and the Queen of Spades was retired to a drawer. No clerk dared reopen. As from Mycroft Holmes, his presence in Whitehall quietly diminished. He took longer holidays, offered fewer directives, and once, in an uncharacteristic gesture, sent Holmes a rare bottle of Bordeaux with no note attached. In time, all signals fade, but the tune, that strange, haunting rhythm hidden in every code, every silence, every tick of the pocket watch, that tune never truly ended. It simply moved on. UNPLAYED. And Sherlock Holmes, in his own quiet way, let it rest. At last.